Afternoon and welcome. I'm going to get started right now. I know some of you have time limits and wanted to welcome you all to our bi-monthly webinar. Today we're going to be talking about our caseload ratios for the Regional Center of the East Bay, but first I'll start with a couple of updates for you on COVID and some other things that are happening in our community right now. In terms of COVID-19 cases, we are continuing to see a very stable number of cases. We have a few every week of people we find out in our community who are testing positive, but it is not an overwhelming number, which is a very good thing. And I did want to let everyone know that if you as an individual served or a family member or a service provider are working with someone who's testing positive, please reach out to your case manager because we do have some PPE available, the personal protective equipment, especially for emergency situations where people are newly diagnosed. So that is one thing we have available for you, and I want to make sure everyone knows about that. And the second thing is, please get your flu shot if that's something you are able to do, because we are going to go into flu season and we really want to make sure we have a few serious cases of flu coming up this winter, as we are also experiencing COVID-19. And the state of California has a task force that is looking at when the vaccine is available, how that would be distributed. And our partners at the Department of Developmental Services are really focused on seeing that our community is part of the first wave of people who would be eligible for vaccines, especially those living in group and congregate type situations. So that's something I did want to share with you today. The other thing I wanted to mention as well, we're holding these webinars, and many regional centers are similarly holding webinars. The Department of Developmental Services, which is the agency that we contract with in Sacramento, will be holding 2 webinars in the next week for people served and their families. One of these will be held tomorrow, and one will be held next Monday or Tuesday, I believe. And if you go to our website or the Department of Developmental Services website, you can register for those. And they're going to be focused on participant-directed services, which is where you choose a worker and refer them to an agency. Something that we do a lot of in our community, but we don't necessarily call it participant-directed. We tend to call it EOR, a different term and a slightly different program. And the final update before I go into our formal presentation is that I wanted to let our community know that in the next few weeks, the Department of Developmental Services is also going to have a survey. And the survey is going to be for individuals and families served. And it's going to ask questions about the experience during COVID-19 shelter in place and what has gone well and what areas we might be able to make improvements in across the state. So I did want to let you know about that. We will be asking our case managers to share that with people served and their families, and we also will have it on our website when that occurs. So right now I'm going to go in and share my screen and go into our formal presentation on our caseload ratios. And it always takes a minute or two to pop up and allow us to share, so please bear with us on this. Okay, I hope everyone is able to see the screen right now. My panelists, can you see the screen? Yes, I think so. Okay. So this is our meeting on RCD caseload ratios and our plan of correction. Why are we having a caseload ratio plan of correction? And if you've been involved in the developmental disability service system for years, you've probably heard of this before. But the section of the W Welfare and Institutions Code that governs the regional center, which is called the Lanterman Act, but that's section 4640.6, requires regional centers to submit a plan of correction when we do not meet the caseload ratios that are required in law for 2 consecutive reporting periods. And the reporting periods are each year. We are required to develop a plan of correction and get input from the state council, local organizations, family members, employees, labor unions, service providers, and other interested parties. What does this mean? Every year in March, we're required to provide caseload ratio data to the Department of Developmental Services. And a caseload ratio means how many consumers are assigned to be served by one case manager. The data is collected on March 1st and looks at case management positions that are filled as of the date or that haven't been vacant for more than 60 days. There are certain required reporting categories and different ratios for each of those categories. We have a ratio for early start, people who are on the Medicaid waiver, people who have recently moved from developmental centers, and a new category established just last year, people with complex needs. And these are the caseload ratios that are required in law. For those who are on our Medicaid waiver, we are supposed to have one case manager for every 62 consumers. The same ratio is required for people under the age of 3 years and for people who have moved from a developmental center more than 24 months ago. And then we have some tighter, smaller caseloads required for people who've moved from a developmental center between 12 and 24 months ago or within the last 12 months, and those are 1 to 45. For anyone over 3 years of age who isn't on the waiver or who hasn't moved from a developmental center, the ratio is 1 to 66. And then for those with complex needs, that new category, the caseload ratio required is 1 to 25. And so this little diagram here shows you how many consumers we have in each of these categories. On the waiver, 7,238. People under the age of 3 years, 1,955, and this is data from March of last year. People who've moved over 24 months from developmental centers, 247, and then 46 in the last 12 to 24 months. And then within the last 12 months at that point, we only had 2. We have 11,681 people who are over 3 years old, not on the Medicaid waiver, and not moved from a developmental center. And then we have 70 people who have complex needs, and that number is based on certain categories of involvement with the criminal justice system, involvement with crisis services, and so forth that we have in that category. And these are the ratios that we actually had when we reported last March. Our caseloads for people on the waiver were 1 to 74. Our caseloads for those under 3 were 1 to 65. For people who'd moved over 24 months ago, we had caseload ratios that were 1 to 55. For those who moved between 12 and 24 months, it was 1 to 22, and 1 to 27 for the people who had moved within the last 12 months. And then our caseloads for those over 3 years, non-waiver and non-mover, 1 to 87. And our complex needs caseloads were 1 to 25. And so I like to show you what the California average was. We are basically somewhat in the range of average for most of our caseloads. We are a little lower around our waiver caseloads, slightly higher for our children under 3, slightly lower for some of these other caseloads, and higher for those over 3, non-waiver and non-mover. And we're exactly right for the complex needs caseloads. And then I wanted to show you this, which shows what has changed since last year. And what I will show you is our waiver caseload last year was 1 to 72. This year was 1 to 74. So our caseloads have gone up over the last year. And if you look at across California, last year the average California was 1 to 73, and this year it's 1 to 75. And we see that same thing happening in most of the other areas. Over the last year, caseloads have gone up across the state of California. And so these are the terms for the caseloads, and I already spoke about those, but early start under 3 is 0 to 36 months, and children in transition is 3 to 18 and 18 to 22, and adults and older adults are 18 and older. Our caseloads are also mixed. Our early start caseloads are primarily all on early start caseloads only, but our children in transition, adults and older adults, have a mix, and those mixes include people on the waiver as well as people not on the waiver. And so those can vary in terms of the required caseload ratio for each of those. And then I want to explain to you what is going on here with us not meeting our caseload ratios. We have not met our caseload ratios in all areas for at least 10 years. And I believe we had a year where we did in the early 2000s, and then we've had many years where we have not. The way regional centers are funded by the Department of Developmental Services is by something that's called the core staffing formula. And for almost all positions, this formula is used to determine our allocation. And it allocates money based on the number of individuals we serve and those caseload ratios that would be required. But the dollar amount for the salary for a case manager, as well as for other positions, is unchanged from the early 1990s. It is at best about half of what would be required salary for a position, and required in 2020 terms. Some new positions are allocated at a reasonable salary. However, whenever it's allocated, it does not increase from year to year. So what that means is we received funding about 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, for an autism specialist at a salary that was reasonable when we first received that funding. However, in subsequent years, it remains at the funding level it was first allocated at. There is also no consideration in this allocation for regional variations in cost of living. So we receive the same dollar amounts in the allocation as does the Central Valley or other places where the cost of living is a little lower. Our allocation also includes some continued unallocated reductions, which mean after we receive an allocation, our base allocation, there are dollars taken off of it from previous recessions that continue to be applied. We are also competing with social service organizations in our area, especially counties, who hire at higher salaries and impact our retention. And we also have continuing increases in healthcare costs, which are not factored in to any of our formulas. What would it take to make a 1:62 caseload ratio? And so I'm going to go back to one of these slides and the one with the number of consumers. So when I look at the people on the waiver, right now, the required caseload ratio for that group is 1:62. We currently have, or at least in March, we had 7,238 people in that category. And our ratio was 1:74, which means that we had about 98 case managers serving that population. If we went back and we looked at 7,238 consumers at the 1:62 ratio, I put in the wrong number, so I should not do that. We should have 117 case managers. So in that area, we're about 19 case managers short. If we look at our over 3 population, non-waiver, non-mover, we have 11,681 folks, and we currently have in that category 134 case managers. If we met our caseload ratios, and I'm playing with my calculator as I'm speaking to you, if we met our caseload ratios, we would need to have 177 case managers, which is 43 more case managers in that area. So we're approximately 63, 64 case managers short in terms of our caseload ratios at this point. And the average, the estimate across the state is we're about 700 case managers short statewide to 800. We have to submit a plan to the department about what we're going to do about the caseload ratios. And I think we continue at this regional center to prioritize case management positions when we hire. Of course, there are positions that support case management, which are also important at the regional center, as well as positions that pay our bills or develop resources. So it is a balance between those positions, because if we don't have people paying the bills, doing client trust, and those sorts of things, we're also not supporting consumers. I think the most important thing that we do is we continue to advocate for adequate funding to meet the required ratios. And this is something that has been going on for many years. And we talked to the legislature about this, and we hope to make progress. If it weren't for COVID-19, I actually believe that we had a pretty strong reason to advocate for these required caseloads to be funded adequately so that we could meet these requirements. The other thing is that we continue to work on streamlining processes and technology to allow case managers to have more contact with consumers and their families so that the impacts of higher caseloads can be reduced if people actually can do certain tasks using technology and different things. During the pandemic, we have been able to do some visits remotely when that is agreed to by people served. And we hope that if that's something that people want, it can continue in the future because it does allow for more contact, not all the time, but at least on some intermittent visits, it may be fine to do that in the future. And so that is the end of my PowerPoint. And the next area that we do here is we will take any questions or comments that people have, both in the chat as well as if you want to raise your hand, I can let you talk as well. But we do this presentation year after year, and we submit a similar plan year after year to the Department of Developmental Services. Unfortunately, it really is about the funding.
El asunto al final
we hope that there can be some improvements with that. We actually do believe that the caseload ratios that are in law are probably not even the best ratios for certain individuals. We believe there are probably more people who would benefit from the 1 to 25 caseload ratios, at least for limited periods of time. And we also believe that there are definitely reasons in the early start caseloads and in other age groups where a period of time with a lower caseload would make sense. So I'm happy to take any comments in the chat. We also posted what we will submit to the department after hearing comments from the community over the next week. And we also will take comments to our Write to Us address if you want to give us any feedback on caseloads and what that experience is for you. So I'll stop talking and I can take any questions or hear any comments from anyone. So please do that if you'd like. So if we don't have any more questions, I do want to share that on November 20th, which is 2 weeks from now, we're actually going to have a special community meeting that's going to be focused on institutional deeming and the Medicaid waiver. And for our community partners, we're going to be sharing that information on that so we can get the word out for families who might be interested in looking into institutional deeming and the ability to get Medicaid, Medi-Cal for family members, even if the family income is higher than what would usually qualify. So wanted to share that with you. We will announce that on our website as well. So I will close unless we have further questions. And don't worry, this is pretty par for the course with our caseload ratio meetings, that we don't experience a lot of comment on it. But we are very interested if you have different ideas, different input to share with us. different ideas for what we could do differently in terms of what we have right now in terms of our service system. So thank you.